Some of your anxiety is not coming from what you know. It is coming from your demand to know what you cannot know yet. You want to know how it is going to work out. You want to know what they meant. You want to know whether you made the right decision. You want to know if the relationship is going somewhere. You want to know if the opportunity is coming. You want to know when God is going to move. And sometimes you do not even need an answer because something is wrong. You need an answer because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. That distinction matters because if uncertainty is the one thing making you uncomfortable, getting one answer will not necessarily give you peace. Your mind will just find another question. That is how overthinking becomes a cycle. You answer one what if, your mind creates another. You solve one possibility, your mind introduces three more. You replay the conversation until you finally think you understand what happened. Then your mind says, okay, but what if? And here we go again. Some of us are trying to finish conversations that life has not finished having yet. We are mentally demanding conclusions from chapters that are still being written. And then we wonder why we are exhausted. Psychologically, uncertainty can feel threatening because your brain loves predictability. Predictability creates a sense of safety. If I know what is coming, I can prepare. If I know what they're thinking, I can protect myself. If I know whether this will work, I can decide whether it is safe to try. But life does not give us that kind of access. And that means emotional maturity requires developing the ability to say, I don't know yet, and I can still be okay. That is a powerful sentence because some people can survive bad news better than they can survive no news. At least bad news gives them something concrete, but waiting, silence, ambiguity, that is where the mind starts writing its own screenplay. And let me tell you something about an anxious mind. It rarely writes comedies, it writes tragedies. You sent the text, they have not responded. 20 minutes later, your mind has written the season finale. They're mad. I said too much. I knew something was different. Meanwhile, they might be in Target. You have to learn the difference between information and imagination. Information is what you actually know. Imagination is what your fear created to fill the space where information was missing. And one of the greatest freedoms you can develop is the ability to leave a blank space blank. I don't know what they meant yet. I don't know how this will turn out yet. I don't know what God is doing yet. I don't know what the next 6 months will look like yet. And I don't have to turn that I don't know to something bad is going to happen. Sometimes the healthiest answer available to you is I don't know yet. And peace begins when you stop treating uncertainty like an emergency. Control can look incredibly responsible when fear is wearing it. That is why some people do not realize they have a control problem. They think they have a preparation problem. They call it being thorough. They call it thinking ahead. They call it protecting themselves. They call it making sure. But underneath all of that thinking can be one quiet belief. If I can understand everything, maybe nothing can surprise me enough to hurt me. And I understand why somebody develops that, especially when life has surprised you before. If you've experienced betrayal, instability, abandonment, disappointment, or environments where you constantly had to read the room, your mind may have learned pay attention to everything, watch people's tone and watch their face and watch what changes, watch what they do not say. Figure it out before it happens, because if you can see pain coming, maybe it will hurt less. That might have helped you survive something, but survival strategies can become prisons when you keep using them in places where you are no longer in danger. Now somebody changes their tone slightly and you are investigating. Somebody needs space and you are analyzing. Something does not happen according to schedule and your mind immediately assumes something is wrong. You are not experiencing the moment anymore. You are conducting surveillance on your own life. And this is where accountability comes in. Your history can explain why control feels safe. But eventually, you have to ask whether control is still serving you because there are things you cannot control. Other people's feelings, other people's choices, timing, outcomes, whether somebody understands you, whether somebody stays, whether an opportunity chooses you. You can influence some things. You can prepare for some things. You can communicate. You can set boundaries. You can make wise decisions. But there comes a point where preparation ends and control begins. And you have to know where that line is because trying to control uncontrollable things does not make you powerful. It makes you tired. And spiritually, this is one of the places where faith becomes very practical to me because trusting God does not mean sitting around doing nothing. You still prepare, you still work, you still make the call, you still have the conversation, you still apply, you still study, you still show up. But after you have done what belongs to you, you have to stop trying to do God's part too. Some of us are praying, God, I trust you. Then getting up from the prayer and immediately returning to the investigation, checking, rechecking, replaying, predicting, trying to force tomorrow to explain itself today. Maybe surrender is not doing nothing. Maybe surrender is knowing when you have done enough. You can be responsible without being in control. You can prepare without predicting everything. You can care without carrying everything. And you can trust God without requiring Him to explain Himself on your timeline. Sometimes the answer you keep asking for is not the answer you actually need because somebody already answered you. You just did not feel better long enough. So you asked again. Are we good? Yeah. You sure? Yes. Did I do something? No. Okay. 20 minutes later, you seem different. That is when you have to recognize that the conversation may no longer be about communication anymore. It may be about reassurance. Reassurance feels good because it temporarily lowers anxiety. Someone tells you everything is okay, you relax. Someone tells you they love you, you relax. Someone tells you that you did not mess anything up, you relax. But if you never learn how to tolerate uncertainty internally, the relief does not last. Soon, you will find yourself needing another dose, another text, another conversation, another confirmation, another sign. And without realizing it, you can make somebody else responsible for regulating an anxiety they did not create. That is where relationships can become exhausted, not because reassurance is bad. We all need reassurance sometimes. Healthy relationships include reassurance. But there is a difference between receiving reassurance and requiring another human being to constantly convince your fear that you are safe. And this does not only happen in relationships. You can do this with decisions. You ask 5 people what they think, and then you ask 5 more, not because you need wisdom, but because you want somebody to guarantee you will not regret your decision. You can do it with your purpose too. Do you think I should do this? Do you think I'm good enough? Do you think this can work? Eventually, you have collected 12 options, and somehow you are more confused than you were when you started. But sometimes advice is not what you are looking for. You are looking for certainty, and nobody can give you that. This is where one principle that cognitive behavioral work becomes useful. Notice the cycle: trigger, anxiety, reassurance seeking, temporary relief, anxiety returns, reassurance seeking again. If you never interrupt the cycle, your brain learns I cannot calm down until somebody gives me an answer. So start practicing a pause. When you feel the urge to ask again, do not immediately obey it. Give yourself 10 minutes. Ask, has something actually changed since the last answer I received? If nothing has changed, sit with the discomfort for a moment. Breathe, pray, write down what you actually know. Remind yourself, I am uncomfortable, but discomfort does not automatically mean danger. That is emotional regulation. You are teaching yourself that you can experience uncertainty without immediately escaping it, because reassurance can comfort you, but if you become dependent on it, the very thing making you feel safe can quietly teach you that you cannot trust yourself. You are trying to solve problems for a person who doesn't even exist yet. And I think some of us need to hear that. You are sitting in August trying to figure out what December you is going to do. You're trying to predict how you will feel if something happens, how you will respond, whether you will be ready, whether you will have enough, whether you will know what to say. And your mind is demanding answers from today's version of you for circumstances tomorrow's version of you has not even experienced yet. But here is what overthinking forgets. The version of you who eventually arrives at that moment will have something you do not have right now. More information, more experience, more context, possibly more resources, more wisdom, more conversations, more growth, and most importantly, the grace for that day. You are trying to carry tomorrow using today's information. No wonder it feels heavy. You are solving an equation with half the numbers missing, then blaming yourself because you cannot get the answer. Think about how many things you once worried about that eventually became manageable when you actually got there. Before the conversation, you thought, I don't know what I'm going to say. Then the conversation happened and you found the words. Before the transition, you thought, I don't know how I'm going to handle this. Then life happened and somehow you handled Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday. Not perfectly, but you made it. Sometimes strength does not arrive early because you do not need it early. Sometimes clarity does not arrive early because you do not need it early. And sometimes God does not give you the entire map because today's obedience only requires today's direction. Jesus says something incredibly practical when he taught not to worry about tomorrow because tomorrow will worry about itself. That is not permission to be irresponsible. That is wisdom about mental load. Tomorrow has its own problems, and tomorrow will also have its own information, its own strength, its own decisions, its own grace. So when your mind starts asking, what am I going to do if, bring yourself back? Is that happening today? If the answer is no, ask, what actually belongs to me today? Maybe today you need to send one email, study one chapter, have one conversation, save more money, rest, make the appointment, take the first step. That is enough. You do not need strength for every possible future. You need enough courage for the next faithful step. Stop demanding that today's version of you know how to survive every tomorrow. Let tomorrow meet the person you are becoming. Some questions are keeping you stuck because they do not have useful answers. Why did they do that? What if I had said something different? What if I had left earlier? What if I had stayed longer? What if they finally realized what they lost? What if I never find somebody else? What if I chose the wrong path? What if? Some questions create insight, other questions create loops, and wisdom is learning the difference. A useful question moves you somewhere. What can I learn from this? What boundary do I need now? What was my responsibility? What was not my responsibility? What do I want to do differently next time? Those questions can produce growth, but rumination asks questions with no finish line. It keeps reopening the case after all the available evidence has already been presented. You become the prosecutor, the defense attorney, the witness, the jury, and somehow court is in session at 2:17 in the morning. That is not reflection anymore. That is mental repetition. And repetition can feel deep simply because it lasts a long time. But spending 4 hours thinking about something does not automatically mean you understood it better. Sometimes you just suffered longer. And this is where I want you to use something simple. When you catch yourself asking the same question repeatedly, ask, is this question producing information, action, or acceptance? If it is producing information, keep exploring. If it leads to a healthy action, take action. If there is no more information and no action available, you may have arrived at acceptance. And acceptance is difficult because acceptance means acknowledging that some stories end without explaining themselves. Some people will never give you the apology. Some relationships will never give you closure. Some decisions will always contain a little uncertainty. Some seasons will only make sense when you look backward. And this is where faith becomes deeper than explanation, because sometimes God gives you understanding and sometimes he gives you enough peace to continue without it. Those are not the same thing. We often ask God, tell me why. And sometimes the answer is not why. Sometimes the answer is keep walking, because closure is not always getting the missing answer. Sometimes closure is realizing the missing answer no longer has permission to stop your life. Not every question deserves another year of you. Some questions need answers. Some questions need wisdom, and some questions need to be released. Peace is knowing you do not have to know what happens next to remain grounded in who you are. That is different, because if your peace requires everything around you to make sense, life will constantly be able to take your peace away at any time it wants. One unanswered text, one unexpected bill, one change in somebody's behavior, one closed door, one delayed opportunity, one doctor's appointment, one season that did not go according to plan. And suddenly your entire world, or your internal world, is gone. What if peace becomes less dependent on circumstances explaining themselves? What if you could say, I don't understand this, but I know how I want to respond. I don't know what they are going to choose, but I know what my boundary is. I don't know whether this opportunity will work, but I know I am going to prepare. I don't know what God is doing, but I know who I am becoming while I wait. That is stability, and stability is different from certainty. Certainty says, I know what is going to happen. Stability says, whatever happens, I trust myself to respond wisely, and I trust God to meet me there. That is ultimately what we're trying to build when we talk about mastering the mind. Not a mind that never gets scared, not a mind that never questions, not a mind that never overthinks, a mind that knows how to come home, a mind that recognizes when fear is writing fiction, a mind that knows when enough information is enough, a mind that can experience an uncomfortable emotion without turning it into an emergency, a mind that knows the difference between preparation and control, a mind that knows when to think and when to release. So here's what I want you to practice after this lesson. When your mind begins demanding an answer you do not currently have, ask yourself, what do I know? What can I control? What belongs to today, and what do I need to release? Those four questions pull you out of the imaginary future and back into the life actually happening in front of you. And if the answer is, I have done everything I can today, then maybe your next responsibility is not more than thinking. Maybe it is resting. Maybe it is praying. Maybe it is trusting. Maybe it is going to sleep and allowing tomorrow to introduce itself when it gets here. Because you do not need every answer to take the next step. You do not need the entire map to move with wisdom. And you do not need God to show you the ending before you trust Him with the next page. Sometimes maturity sounds like I don't know yet. Sometimes healing sounds like I cannot control that. And sometimes faith sounds like I'm going anyway. So here is what I want you to practice after this lesson. When your mind begins demanding an answer you do not currently have, ask yourself, what do I know? What can I control? What belongs to today? And what do I need to release? Those four questions pull you out of the imaginary future and back into the life that's actually happening in front of you. And if the answer is, I have done everything I can today, then maybe your next responsibility is not more thinking. Maybe it is resting. Maybe it is praying. Maybe it is trusting. Maybe it is going to sleep and allowing tomorrow to introduce itself when it gets here. Because you do not need every answer to take the next step. You do not need the entire map to move with wisdom. And you do not need God to show you the ending before you trust Him with the next page. Sometimes maturity sounds like, I don't know yet. Sometimes healing sounds like, I cannot control that. And sometimes faith sounds like, I am going anyway. J fam, I'm so grateful for your souls, your spirits, your hearts, and your minds. And I just want y'all to always remember that keep learning, keep growing, and keep becoming the person God is calling you to be. I'll see you in the next lesson.